whole housing market is propped up on these bad loans. They will fail.
The housing market is rock solid.
It's a time bomb.
You know what? American people are getting screwed by the big banks.
And I am getting madder and madder.
It's unbelievable.
There's some shady stuff going down.
All the banks were having a big old party. The world economy might collapse.
I'm sure the world's banks have more incentives than greed.
You're wrong.
No one's paying attention.
The banks got greedy.
Kind of brilliant.
Fraud has never ever worked. Eventually, things go south. When the hell did we forget all that?
How can the banks let this happen?
It's fueled by stupidity.
But that's not stupidity, that's fraud.
Tell me the difference between stupid and illegal, and I'll have my wife's brother arrested.
You have any idea what you just did? You just bet against the American economy.
If you're wrong, you can lose it all. The banks defrauded the American people. Now we can kick them in the teeth.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Brock Lawley program. My name is Brock Lawley, and this is going to be a special podcast illuminating the economic crisis of 2008. Now, here's what we know, right? You heard the word banks about 100 times in that intro. And I recently saw a movie called The Big Short. It was actually a good movie. It was a star-studded cast. But it pushed me over the top because the propaganda and the bias in this film was so overwhelming that it motivated me to make this podcast. Now, prior to about 6, 7, 8 months ago, I knew just enough about this stuff to be dangerous, but not enough to be valid in pontificating or commentating on it, quite frankly. And to be honest, I always knew it was a double-edged sword. I knew everybody that was touching this was guilty. Everybody touching this was ugly. So I want to lead by saying that I am in no way, shape, or form some sycophant for the banks. I dislike the banks just as much as you. They got just as much of my tax dollars as they got of your tax dollars. Plus, I think it's a hilarious profession where apparently, especially the upper echelons of this industry, you can just make astronomically foolish decisions and pay no consequences. This I do not like. But I noticed in just some very, very simple reading, and also because I've been a political student for a number of decades, I've noticed that a huge, enormous villain in this whole ordeal was always omitted from the story. Always strategically omitted. And this film arguably was the biggest perpetrator of all. Because to make this film and not speak of this villain is to be purposefully duplicitous, purposefully to lie to its audience via omission. And it just made me angry. So what we're going to do in this podcast is get to the truth. You are going to continue to hear the Great Recession. That's what the Democrats call it. What was Barack Obama handed? And didn't he do such a bang-up job being handed such a steaming pile of pig, swine, filth by way of an economic plop in his lap? Well, who's to blame for all this? And what are the many, many dimensions of blame? Well, here's what actually happened. But before we get into that, I'm just going to give you a real simple clip, an entertaining clip from the movie you just heard the trailer from, The Big Short. And it's essentially setting up the canvas on which I'm going to paint with sound bites and word-for-word quotes from the very people who are now trying to blame shift this. Let's listen. Now remember, this is a biased film.
This is your basic mortgage bond. All right? The originals were simple. They were just thousands of AAA mortgages bundled together, guaranteed by the U.S. government. The modern ones are different. They're private, and they're made up of layers of tranches. The highest level AAAs getting paid first, the lowest rated Bs getting paid last, taking on defaults first. Now, obviously, if you're buying Bs, you can make more money, but they're a little risky. Sometimes they fail. Somewhere along the line, these Bs and double Bs went from a little risky to dog. Where's the trash? I'm talking rock bottom FICO scores. No income verification. Adjustable rates. The default rates are already up from 1% to 4%, fellas. And if they rise to 8%, and they will, a lot of these triple Bs are going to 0 too. And that is an opportunity.
Okay, you're saying that at 8% the bonds fail, and we are already at 4%?
That's right.
If they go to 8, it's Armageddon.
Yeah, that's right. No one is paying attention because the banks are too busy getting paid obscene fees to sell these bonds.
But wait, you are the bank. When you work for the bank, I bet your margins are pretty nice and fat.
Let's not talk about my margins, by the way. Being nice and fat. That's a nice shirt. Do they make it for men?
Aren't you the bank?
I work for the bank. I don't think like a bank. Big bank, small bank, I like to make money. All right? Let me put it this way. I'm standing in front of a burning house, and I'm offering you fire insurance on it. A's, 0. B's, 0. Double B's, 0. Triple B's, 0. And then that happens.
What is that?
That's America's housing market.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, pretty dramatic stuff, but a nice canvas, a nice structure. How many times again did you hear the word banks in that? And there was this little line, you might have missed it. It was like, no one is paying attention to this. There's all this housing garbage being bundled and sold, and nobody is paying attention. Now, bear in mind, I come to you as a person who just bought a house. And let me tell you, in 2016, this process is arduous. I mean, they turn over every stone. They crawl up every orifice and poke around with one of those little headlamps like construction workers or coal miners have. What's going on? What are you making? What kind of liabilities do you have financially? What kind of credit card debt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Luckily for Brock, he's squeaky clean. But this is the thing. This is coming to me ripe. So I know what I'm talking about, even in the practical sense. But I've done some research. So is it true that nobody knew what was coming? Is it true that this thing sprung into being simply because of greed, Wall Street, banks, everything that Bernie Sanders might use as a talking point on the stump speech? Well, not so much. Let's take a listen.
Financial analysts are saying that if mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had been effectively regulated years ago, the supercharged subprime mortgage meltdown that led to the current financial mess would either never have happened or would have been nowhere near as severe. What were those warning signs? Who raised them and who disputed them?
The Bush administration raised red flags starting in April 2001. The 02 budget request declares that the size of mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is, quote, a potential problem because financial trouble in either one of them could, quote, cause strong repercussions in financial markets. In 2003, the White House warning about Fannie and Freddie was upgraded to a systemic risk that could spread beyond just the housing sector.
Now, this is 2003, ladies and gentlemen. And then I'm going to play for you quotes from hearing after hearing after hearing where Republicans were trying to get to the bottom of why is this happening? Why are garbage mortgages being lent? Why are banks being, and this is a real key word, forced by legislation to make these loans? Let's listen to the culmination of this story.
In fall of 03, the Bush administration was pushing Congress hard to create a new federal agency to regulate and supervise Fannie and Freddie.
We're going to hear from that regulatory agency.
Both government-sponsored enterprises, or GSEs.
Republican. We need a strong, world-class regulatory agency to oversee the prudential operations of the GSEs and the safety and the soundness of their financial activities.
But then Treasury Secretary Snow was getting a lot of pushback from then-ranking member, now chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Democratic Congressman Barney Frank.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not in a crisis.
Now, this guy has hours and hours and hours of audio and YouTube video where he is denying that there's any housing crisis. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. But he continuously says it. And by the way, you almost have every single ranking Democrat on audio and film saying this exact thing. This is years before the crash. This is when certain entities of our government were getting very, very suspicious of things going on in the housing market and waving flags, having hearings. They were all called racists, by the way. They were all called bigots. They were all called people trying to harm the poor. Let's continue to listen.
In fact, Frank said the federal government should be encouraging Fannie and Freddie to do more to get low-income families into homes. And he believed too many people had a sky-is-falling mentality.
The more people, in my judgment, exaggerate a threat of safety and soundness, the more people conjure up the possibility of serious financial losses, which I do not see.
Okay, there you go. This is a major Democrat saying that it's all fictitious. All the warnings of the housing market, they're all fictitious. And all these scare tactics, these sky is falling, apprehensive Republicans, he's not seeing any problem. And why are they making a big deal about this? And why are they warning people? And why are they spending congressional dollars on hearings when there is no problem? Nothing to see here. By the way, that's a Democrat talking point on every single failure. Is nothing to see here? Nothing to see here. Did Hillary have secret emails? Nothing to see here. Is there a server? Nothing to see here.
Which I do not see. I think we see entities that are fundamentally sound financially and withstand some of the disaster scenarios.
Turns out, man couldn't have been worse in his prediction. Could not have been more wrong. No, literally couldn't have been more wrong. Opposite of what was right.
And even if there were a problem, the federal government doesn't bail them out.
Federal government did bail them out.
But the more pressure there is there, then the less I think we see in terms of affordable housing.
The legislation was blocked. In 2005, Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan added his voice on Fannie and Freddie after Fannie leaders admitted major accounting screw-ups. Quote, enabling these institutions to increase in size, and they will once the crisis in their judgment passes. We are placing the total financial system of the future at a substantial risk.
That seems like an unbelievably stark warning to me. Seems a little Notre Dame-like in its prediction, specifically as we sit here in 2016 and look at the fiscal wreckage that ensued.
Adding later at another hearing on the topic,
Republican. If we fail to strengthen GSE regulation, we increase the possibility of insolvency and crisis.
But the two mortgage giants had staunch defenders. Democratic Senator Charles Schumer said, quote, I think Fannie and Freddie over the years have done an incredibly good job and are an intrinsic part of making America the best housed people in the world.
Chucky Schumer made an appearance. We all know Chucky Schumer is a credibility, right? Since we just did the Supreme Court nominee hypocrisy piece, where Chucky Schumer just licks his finger and says whatever old crap rolls up the lifts that's convenient for the Dems that day.
If you look over the last 20 or whatever years, they've done a very, very good job. Senator John McCain co-sponsored legislation pushing for regulation, delivering a speech on the Senate floor in 2006.
John McCain, Republican, pushing for regulation. Regulation on this Jenga set that was the then housing market.
Quote, for years I have been concerned about the regulatory structure that governs Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And the sheer magnitude of these companies and the role they play in the housing market, the GSEs need to be reformed without delay. That bill made it out of the Senate Banking Committee with a party line vote. All of the Democrats voted against.
I'm going to repeat that. All of the Democrats voted against regulating the then warned against housing debacle. Every single Democrat, everyone, including then BO, voted against it.
Republican.
It is indeed a very troubling report, but it is a report of extraordinary importance, not only to those who wish to own a home, but as to the taxpayers of this country who would pay the cost of the cleanup of an enterprise failure.
Republican.
The analysis makes clear that more resources must be brought to bear to ensure the highest standards of conduct are not only required, but more importantly, they are actually met.
Okay, real quick. What are we talking about here? Fannie and Freddie are federally backed entities. Fannie and Freddie is think of it as your money. And what the Democrats wanted to do, and hey, maybe we can all get on board with this ideologically, by way of a wish list, by way of a if the world was a perfect place. What they were realizing is socioeconomic strapped people, poor people, and predominantly minority people fitting that category were not in a situation to own homes. They weren't in a situation to own homes because they didn't have long-term employment. They had a lot of debt. They had an inability to put down 20%, etc. on a home, 20% being your promise that you have skin in the game, that you're not going to walk away from your mortgage. A lot of very, very poor minorities were not able to do that. So the thinking is, we want more African Americans, Latinos, and other minority groups, socioeconomically challenged groups in our country to own homes. It's a beautiful sentiment, one that I don't necessarily on its face disagree with. For example, I've lived in the city. When I was going to college, I lived in the city, which was ironic because I was living in squalor in the city, listening to leftist professors that lived in gated communities lecture me because I don't care about the poor. Anyway, I lived in the cities, and what I very, very quickly realized is if you don't have skin in the game, what I mean by that is if you don't own your home, you don't care what your curbside appeal is, you don't care what your shrubs get cut, you don't care if your lawn looks like crap, you don't care about your house because you're just renting it, it's somebody else's problem, and you just farm it all out, thus the communities turn to crap, right? This can be this analogy can be used further on from my example, but that's essentially the thinking. So on one hand, this notion that we want more people to own homes is one I share. I understand that. I definitely understand that. Doesn't change fiscal realities. And wouldn't you know it, here we have the Democratic Party again defying gravity that is economics. See, economics doesn't just feel good, let's do things because it makes us warm and tingly inside. Economics is hard math. Economics is firm math. You wouldn't know that in 2016 because we're just making it rain trillions of dollars out the Obama spigot. But nonetheless, chickens are coming home to roost just like they did in the past. And here's where we find ourselves. So they enact laws. They enact laws that force banks, local banks, medium-sized banks, big banks, force them to lighten their criteria by which they will loan money, mortgages, to buy homes. Force them not to look at things like how much money are you making? How much money is going out every month compared to how much money is coming in? Credit scores, etc. They even accuse these banks of being racist. You can look this all up. So the reason that they were doing that is to keep blacks and to keep minorities out of houses. Now that makes no rational sense to a normal person because banks want to make money. So if you can pay your mortgage, they're more than willing to receive the check. But these lunatic race, class, gender crusaders see everything through the lens of race, which makes them essentially nincompoop maniacs on the landscape of politics. So they force these banks to start making loans. Now here's the culpability of the bank. The bank finds a way to make money. They start bundling these loans and they start selling these crap bundles. Think of them as Jenga sets with huge pieces missing. They don't have any structure. They start selling them and wrapping them up in bigger and bigger bundles. That's what you're hearing. That's what you're hearing them talk about. That's what they're concerned about. That's what they're worried about. But anybody who calls warning, anybody who says to the Democrats who are all in on this Fannie and Freddie, because these guys think this is them coming in on a white horse and saving the minorities. Most of the minorities, by the way, had to walk away from their house, lost their house. There was devastating economic tsunami that hit in 2008. But it didn't matter because the Democrats felt good. So they died on this hill. They called anybody who had a regulatory concern racist, any other kind of name. And you'll notice as we make our way through the soundbites, you'll notice they never address the substantive pushback from these regulatory bodies or the Republicans on this panel. They just attack them personally. Let's listen to these hearings.
Democrat. Through nearly a dozen hearings where, frankly, we
Democrat.
were trying to fix something that wasn't broke. Mr. Chairman, we do not have a crisis at Freddie Mac, and in particular at Fannie Mae.
We do not have a crisis. Let's move on.
Under the outstanding leadership of Mr. Frank Raines.
Frank Raines was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of bonuses. We know that now. An insanely corrupt man with lobbyists like bookends on both sides of the issue. It's disgusting what we know now. And why are these Democrats defending him? Because it's a firewall, it's a shield to their own graft and corruption.
Democrat. And as well as the fact that I'm just pissed off at...
He's pissed off that there's regulatory attention paid to this.
Ophelia, because if it wasn't for you, I don't think that we'd be here in the first place. And now the problem that we have and that we're faced with is maybe some individuals who wanted to do away with GSEs in the first place.
GSEs are these totally crapped, bundled loans that, by the way, The Big Short was talking about, but didn't allude in any way, shape, or form that it was the federal government, the Democrat Party specifically on a party line vote, that legislated these things into happening. Didn't mention it, just kept saying bank, 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 bank. Why? Because Hollywood's full of cowards. Full of cowards. You can't tell me that these directors didn't know some of this stuff.
You've given them an excuse to try to have this forum so that we can talk about it and maybe change the direction and the mission of what the GSEs had, which they've done a tremendous job. There's been nothing that was indicated that's wrong, with Fannie Mae. Freddie Mac has come up on its own, and the question that then presents is the competence that your agency has with reference to deciding and regulating these GSEs.
Okay, the GSEs, again, are what totally took a dump on the American society. He's attacking the regulators that are, by the way, just doing their job. That's all they're doing. They just look at hard numbers. That's all they do. They just look at numbers. These numbers aren't checking out. This is going to collapse. The guy's attacking. I'm pissed off. You must have some sort of alternative motive.
And so I wish I could sit here and say that I'm not upset with you, but I am very upset.
Well, you're being upset in a wooden nickel will buy me nothing.
Because, what you do is you give, maybe giving a reason to, as Mr. Gonzalez said, to give someone a heart surgery when they really don't need it.
Oh, we needed a heart surgery. When these hearings were going on, we needed triple freaking bypass.
Republican. In addition to our important oversight role in this committee, I hope that we will move swiftly to create a new regulatory structure for Fannie Mae, for Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Bank.
That is a Republican calling for and begging for regulation on what was then a runaway system of corruption between Wall Street and the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C.
Democrat. This hearing is about the political lynching of Franklin Rand.
Racist allegations. Do you see this? Everybody's a racist. Let alone that the numbers don't add up and that Freddie and Fannie were caught breaking regulatory rules, caught red-handed. Forget that. Everybody's a racist.
Republican. There is a very simple solution. Congress must create a new regulator with powers at least equal to those of other financial regulators, such as the OCC or the Federal Reserve.
Now, why is that? Because those organizations were already bought off. They weren't regulating. And by the way, The Big Short, the film I'm referring to, they go way out of their way to point out that these regulatory committees were not doing their job, that they were rubber stamping these things. But again, they lie by omission by not saying it was because the Democrat Party was calling anybody who waved any flag of warning a racist. They never mention it.
Democrat. What would make you, why should I have confidence? Why should anyone have confidence in you as a regulator at this point?
Sorry, Congressman, OFAO did not improperly apply accounting rules. Freddie Mac did. OFAO did not try to manage earnings improperly. Freddie Mac did. So this isn't about the agency engaging in improper conduct. It's about Freddie Mac.
That is devastating. The guys, of course, the congressmen and representatives just hurling accusations at the regulatory drone guy. He looks like Poindexter in his outfit. The guy's he's paid to crunch numbers. He doesn't even know what this buffoon's talking about. And he's like, look, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do any of the skirting the regulatory system. I didn't do any buying off different regulatory bodies. I didn't spend wildly outside of projected numbers. That's all Fannie and Freddie, run by and protected by you. So why am I fielding insults? Well, you're fielding insults because Democrats, and being a Democrat means never having to say you're sorry and admit anything you do. You just project onto other people race, class, gender, homophobia, xenophobia, phobia.
Republican. And we passed Sarbanes-Oxley. And then I realized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac wouldn't even come under it. They weren't under the 34 Act. They weren't under the 33 Act. they play by their own rules, and I'm tempted to ask how many people in this room are in the payroll of Fannie Mae.
We know now that nearly all of them were.
Because what they do is they basically hire every lobbyist they can possibly hire. They hire some people to lobby, and they hire some people not to lobby so that the opposition can't hire them.
Democrat. You're making judgments about the management of this institution, about the willfulness of practices that may or may not be in controversy. You've imputed various motives to the people running the organization. You went to the board and put a 48-hour ultimatum on them without having any specific regulatory authority to put that kind of ultimatum on them. That sounds like some kind of an invisible line has been crossed.
Republican.
Fannie Mae has manipulated, in my judgment, OFEO for years. And for OFEO to finally come out with a report as strong as it is tells me that's got to be the minimum, not the maximum.
Democrat.
You seem to be saying, well, these are in areas which could raise safety and soundness problems. I don't see anything in your report that raises safety and soundness problems.
Democrat.
Everything has worked just fine. In fact, the GSEs have exceeded their housing goals so as not to impede their affordable housing mission, a mission that has seen 100% loans.
Somewhere along the line, these Bs and double Bs went from a little risky to dog shit. I'm talking rock bottom FICO scores. No income verification. Adjustable rates.
Democrat.
I get the feeling that the markets are not worried about the safety and soundness of Fannie Mae, as OFEO says that it is, but of course, the markets are not political.
Rates are already up from 1% to 4%, fellas. And if they rise to 8%, and they will.
You're saying that at 8% the bonds fail, and we are already at 4%?
That's right.
If they go to 8, it's Armageddon.
Yeah, that's right.
Democrat.
But I have seen nothing in here that suggests that the safety and soundness are at issue, and I think it serves us badly to raise safety and soundness as a kind of a general shibboleth when it does not seem to me to be an issue.
Republican.
Mr. Raines, $1.1 million bonus on a $526,000 salary.
Shameful.
Jamie Gorelick, $779,000 bonus
Corruption.
on a salary of $567,000. I mean, this is nothing less than staggering. Fannie Mae understood the rules and simply chose not to follow them. That if Fannie Mae had followed the practices, there wouldn't have been a bonus day.
Now just listen to this. These Democrat mobsters that are defending this thing are skimming milk off the top of it, giving themselves bonuses to hand out more and more and more of these politically arm-twisting the financial institutions to loan these things, just so they can meet quotas, so that they can get huge, enormous benefits, enormous. It's just so much graft and so much corruption. By the way, the same thing happened at the VA scandal. This exact same thing happened at the VA scandal. Huge bonuses, cooking the books. Soldiers were dying left and right, but the numbers were all jerry-rigged, like some sort of mob book. And they don't have to pay account. Ladies and gentlemen, this is lawlessness. This is Democrat Party lawlessness, and nobody ever has to, the feet are never held to the fire simply because they're Democrats. And media and Hollywood and television and professors, they all just circle the wagon and carry the water. It's disgusting.
Republican.
And you have about 3% of your portfolio set aside. If a bank gets below 4%, they are in deep trouble. So I just want you to explain to me why I shouldn't.
There aren't any banks who only have multifamily and single-family loans. These assets are so riskless.
I think the responsibility that the Democrats have may rest more in resisting any efforts by Republicans in the Congress or by me when I was president to put some standards and tighten up a little on Fannie Mae and Freddie.
Now, what's incredible about that soundbite being out there is, first of all, it's very hard to find. And second of all, Bill Clinton is literally pointing out, now he's covering his own butt is what he's doing, but he's literally pointing out the culpability. He's saying, and this is after the fact, is after the crash, the Republicans wanted to regulate these markets. Democrats didn't, and it turns out they didn't because many of them were skimming off the top with corruption, lawlessly skirting any regulations that they didn't feel like applied to them in there. Again, see, you have to understand the way the Democrat thinks. He thinks to himself, well, yeah, I'm getting these huge bonuses and there's a lot of graft going on, but we're helping minorities. And if we're helping minorities, what is a law to stand in my way? What is a Republican regulatory agency to stand in my way? After all, they have to be thinking in the back of their head, if this whole thing hits the fan, I'm just going to blame Republicans. And the media will run with it because they're Republicans and we're Democrats. And as if this isn't salt enough in the wound. Just 2 weeks ago, your now presumptive Democratic nominee for the White House said this. It's just incredible.
Republicans, they actually, with a straight face, say that the Great Recession was caused by too much regulation on Wall Street.
Is that not painful to hear? So, I want to repeat. It was Republicans who were calling for regulation in this area. It was Democrats that were calling everybody who called for regulation a racist. Now Hillary Clinton gets to go on television and repeatedly say this, by the way, repeatedly say this kind of garbage. No consequences, no pushback. Nobody is playing the clips that I'm playing for you. This is all guerrilla journalism. This is all new media. Is the only people willing to do this. It's just so despicable and shameful. And what kind of cretin reptilian liar says this? When you know for a fact that this woman's beak was all over this thing.
They actually say that.
No, actually, they don't say that.
Every time they say these things, like, the Great Recession was caused by too much regulation.
No. As we just heard with the sound bites. The Great Recession was caused by you and your corrupt party standing in the way of needed regulation and regulating the crap out of small businesses and people who just want to do their job and employ people. That's actually what Republicans and conservatives say. But you're a known liar and you actually belong in a paddy wagon.
À Broclo, les productions